Playing Nirvana.
The Cobain 50.
Nirvana.
Kurt Cobain's top 50 albums.
Nirvana.
From listener-powered KEXP.
This is the Cobain 50 from listener-powered KEXP. I'm Dusty Henry.
And I'm Martin Douglas. This week, Dusty dives into the self-titled album from Rites of Spring, released in 1985. By the way, we're back.
We're back. We made it. We made it through December.
Yeah. Hopefully all of you out there had a good Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, Christmas, atheist, non-denominational holiday.
That's my favorite holiday. I didn't get anybody anything.
Winter solstice. There we go. That's a good one.
I'm getting everybody covered.
So Rites of Spring.
This is when I saw this one on the list, I was like, I feel like I have to do this one because like every editor I've had, I think I've told you this, has identified me as like, oh, you're the emo guy. And for years, like, I don't know why people keep thinking I'm emo. Like, I'm just pitching stories about Page of the Lion and Death Cab and Sunny Day Real Estate. I don't get it.
I think the Sunny Day Real Estate album, especially, like, I identify you with that album, and I think that's like an early emo classic.
Yes.
And so, like, I wouldn't necessarily call you the emo guy, but, like, you also have a more vested interest in early emo than I do. So I kind of look to you towards what's good in emo.
It's not a phase, Martin. God.
This is Dusty diving deep on Rites of Spring's self-titled album on the Cobain 50.
Loosely defined as emotionally charged music, the word emo is largely open to interpretation. That'll depend on your age, where you're from, or just even the entry point you had into the music. For example, my first introduction into emo sounded a bit like this.
Your lipstick is colored up by the angel. I know exactly what goes on. I'm not okay. I'm not okay. When I'm not okay, I'm really not okay. Don't waste your time on me. You're already the voice inside my head.
Until I was told it actually sounds like this. And if you were to ask a younger emo fan today, they might play you something like this.
None of my exes is over the peak. Nobody flexing as much as I be. That's why she text me and tell me she love me. She know that someday I'll be over the sea.
You were made out of plastic, fake. I was tangled up in your drastic ways. Who knew evil girls had the prettiest face? You gave me a heart that was full of mistakes. I gave you my heart and you made heart.
So, what is the right answer? Is there one? Well, the short answer is maybe emo is just misunderstood. Let's back up. Emo isn't a phase.
Phase, Mom? God!
But like other styles of music, it is encompassed in waves. And please bear with me, I haven't forgotten the focus of this episode. Fans have delineated the different eras and styles of emo into these waves. I find it helpful to actually work backwards through the phases to kind of understand how we got here. And don't worry, I'll make damn sure you know what I mean.
I just wanna break you down so badly. When I trip over everything you say, I just wanna break you down so badly.
These waves are not formally set, and fans will argue over which artists fit into each wave. But it's generally accepted that we are currently in what is commonly referred to as fifth wave emo. This includes bands inspired by earlier iterations of the genre, including Paranol from South Korea, who blends elements of emo and shoegaze. as well as emo rap, which was made popular by the late artists Lil Peep and Juice WRLD.
Around a black hole, the same black hole that's in place of my soul. Empty, I feel so goddamn empty. I may go wrong. Don't tempt me.
Before that was the fourth wave. Roughly from the late 2000s to early 2010s, this was an era of reclamation. DIY bands who grew up on emo, merging the sound with elements of indie and math rock. Think bands like Modern Baseball and the verbosely named The World is a Beautiful Place and I Am No Longer Afraid to Die. Now, third wave emo is arguably emo music at its most popular. This began in the early 2000s when emo crawled out from the underground and into the malls. This is where you get the tropes of skinny jeans, swoopy haircuts, and guy liner. The bands leaned in closer to the accessible sounds of pop punk with catchy hooks and heavily emotive lyrics, which drew in masses of emotional teens, like myself. I'm talking bands like Taking Back Sunday, My Chemical Romance, and Fall Out Boy.
We're saving and saving for the road team. We're going down, around, and sugar we're going down swinging. I'll be your number one with a bullet. A loaded gun complex, car getting bullet. We're going down.
Now, going back further into the 90s, the gap between second and third wave emo might be the most jarring. This version of emo, when bands openly rejected the term emo, was far more raw. The music was heavily emotional, but a lot less whiny than third wave emo. And that's no shade. The second wave of emo more or less kicked off after grunge and attributed to works like Weezer's Pinkerton album and Diary from Seattle's own Sunny Day Real Estate.
You taste it, you taste it. When it's time, you taste it, you taste it. When it's time.
Which brings us back to the first wave of emo, the start of emo, and the real focus of today's episode, Rites of Spring, whom many consider to be the first ever emo band.
Party times are far away from where our hearts really wanted to be. Reaching out to find a way to get back to where we've been. And if summer left you dry, with nothing left to try, this time, caught at a distance from myself, and there was no one there to know.
As with most music stemming from hardcore, all roads lead back to Washington, D.C. The nation's capital was brimming with hardcore bands in the 80s. Groups we've already talked about in the series, as well as the hometown of burgeoning punk icons like Henry Rollins and Nirvana drummer Dave Grohl. And of course, you can't talk about DC hardcore without mentioning Ian MacKaye, who fronted the vastly influential band Minor Threat.
We're not the first, but not the last, 'cause I know we're all headed for that hell of crash. The dark is a little, the dark belongs to us. Why is everybody in such a rush?
MacKaye was in another pretty important band that we'll get into later in this episode. But this first wave hardcore sound was spearheaded by Minor Threat, Bad Brains, and others. They sparked a powerful movement in DC. One of these short-lived groups was a band called Insurrection. By the way, you might have trouble finding the band if you're Googling Insurrection Washington, D.C., but you might find some interesting and pretty timely recent history. Much like the one in your Google results, Insurrection didn't last long. The band reportedly worked on a record with MacKaye and planned to release it on the famed Discord Records, but ultimately the band was unsatisfied with the recordings and called it quits. 3 members of Insurrection decided to continue on in a new direction. They had Guy Picciotto on guitar and vocals, Brendan Canty behind the drums, and Mike Fellows on bass guitar. They also brought in friend Edward Janey of the band The Faith to help on second guitar. They started jamming and writing together in December of 1983, dubbing themselves Rites of Spring.
Time is all rules they say. Something that won't just fade away. And these tides of shifting rain. Why are you surprised to see your name? It's such a drag. Time got the best of you. Things you gave you say were taken. Explanation power were excused.
Pechotto has mentioned a couple different reasons for the name. One was that they felt like the hardcore scene was getting stagnant, and it was time for something new. Like the renewal that comes with, say, springtime. Alec Bourgeois of Discord Records called this era in DC a, quote, dark age. As he told Stop Smiling magazine in 2008, you have to understand how miserable the general climate at punk shows was at the time. Shows that had previously featured a diverse community of punks, rastas, freaks, queers, and yes, thugs, mostly looking out for one another, had degenerated into huge mosh pits of mostly ex-jocks and suburban skinheads. The other inspiration for the name came from an unlikely source: the ballet. Some may generalize the ballet as something delicate or soft. But Pechotto and the band saw something different, and like emo, it wasn't just a phase. As he told DC punk fanzine Truly Needy in 1985, we were reading about Stravinsky in the first performance where everybody beat each other on the head, which, side note, is apparently a real thing that happened, where there's a brawl that came out of this ballet performance. Anyway, Pechotto continues, whenever you f*** with someone musically, and they take their music really seriously, they're gonna f*** with you back. Stravinsky, Rites of Spring, and emo as a whole proved a point. Getting people riled up and excited wasn't just about directing fury toward an enemy. There's catharsis in getting out your emotions together. While there's always room to dismantle oppressive structures, sometimes you have to contend with the personal matters weighing on your heart. And that's punk as f*** too.
I was the champion of forget, but I haven't found a way to forgive you yet. And though I know we both are through, all my thoughts are lights converging in on you.
The band moved ahead with their new name and intention. In April 1984, the group got some studio time at Inner Ear Studios and recorded a 6-song demo. They rushed to record since they thought their bassist was going to move to California. They wanted to get down the ideas before he left forever. But just 3 months later, he returned to DC. These demos were more fully realized than you might expect. The band may have actually put more production work into these demos than they did on their eventual debut album. They did far more backwards overdubs, tape loops, and general studio wizardry than you would later hear on the self-titled record. Notably, Canty recalled this was the first time he'd actually heard Pechotto sing. He told Stop Smiling that it blew my mind. Guy went in and let it all out.
What I found, things in this life still are real, but I made no refusal to be concealed. Where the answer lies in a real emotion, not the self-indulgence of self-devotion.
But even from these early demos, you can start to hear that the band was onto something that was different from their peers. The thrashing guitars had become a staple of hardcore, mixed with Pechotto's heavy-hearted lyrics, unlocked a new type of power. It wasn't just whining or woe is me. You could really feel like he was working through some of these complex emotions. In Andy Greenwald's emo history book, Nothing Feels Good, Pechotto has a quote that sums it up well. To hurt yourself playing guitar while falling on stage is far more noble than to be sitting weeping to yourself somewhere.
I read somewhere that every world's a door to something new. What can I get through? What can I get through? And I'm not who I thought I was.
In 1985, they returned to Inner Ear Studios, this time with Mackay to produce their self-titled album. As I mentioned earlier, the album was a lot more raw than the demos. Picciotto has said that making the album felt closer to the Rites of Spring live experience. As he told Stop Smiling, quote, "It was recorded with all four of us in one tiny room, facing each other with no separation at all. We tracked all the music live in one take in the dark with a strobe going. Later on, I recorded all the vocals for the 13 songs in one take as well, one after the other. There are barely any overdubs at all, just some backups, a few bits of percussion, and maybe a guitar part here and there. You feel this rawness throughout the record, especially at the end. When they recorded the closer, End on End, the band locked in on a furious noise jam, going until the tape literally ran out, making for an abrupt ending. While they still retain the furious energy of hardcore, Picciotto's lyrics looked more inward than outward. This wasn't about raging against establishments, it pointed toward a rage inside himself, much like Henry Rollins did on Black Flag's My War, which we covered earlier in this series. Taking center stage was Picciotto's own feelings, emotions, hopes, and worries. In contrast to the very direct motives of early hardcore, many were quick to dub this music emotional. Now, what does that mean? Emotional? Isn't all music emotional? Well, yes. To be honest, it confuses me too. What Rites of Spring did was put all the raw emotion of hardcore and directed it towards themselves and their own feelings. Music has obviously long done this, but the confessional tone of the songs was a new element for hardcore. Some even called it emo-core. Trying to split Rites of Spring from hardcore just might be a fool's errand. Their music is undoubtedly hardcore, and at times, it feels far more removed from the emo that we know today. But take a closer look at some of the songs, and you can kind of see the emo lineage begin to take shape. The song For Want Of is maybe the first iconic emo song. With a ragged voice, Picciotto screams, "But I woke up this morning with a piece of past caught in my throat, and then I choked." Picciotto frequently sings about his heart, falling through a hole in his heart, his heart in his hand, and overall open and vulnerable about his sadness. But this new idea of emo or emo-core wasn't immediately accepted. In fact, it was rejected by the people who created it. Mackay says that he thinks the first instance of emo-core was in a 1985 issue of Thrasher magazine, referencing another band that has a claim to being the first emo act, the group Embrace. Reflecting on it with the music site Exclaim in 2007, Mackay called the term, quote, the stupidest fucking thing I've ever heard in my entire life. When I interviewed Dan Horner and William Goldsmith of Sunny Day Real Estate last year, they recalled similar feelings about being labeled in their early days. Here's Goldsmith.
So first of all, the first time I heard someone say the word emo, it was when they were saying something that was not necessarily pleasant about someone. Oh yeah, it wasn't nice. And and so yeah, it was meant as an insult. And also in the article about Rites of Spring, where it originated, I think it was also not meant to be a compliment. No, it's not. So the origins are negative from what we understand as the reality of it. And also human emotions have been the driving force behind music since the beginning of time. So I mean, to say that's a new thing kind of doesn't make sense, but it is what it is.
It's, you know what, to this day, after all this time, it's impossible for us to define.
Yeah.
Horner adds that the band has since made peace with the descriptor and actually appreciate the influence.
Well, I think it's very humbling to have the label of your band be the genre of music that becomes like the most popular genre of rock and roll, like, in the next decade after you're done. I think it's really cool. Obviously emo started out as a diss, so yeah, we've never called ourselves that at all. But you know how things change and they morph over time, and if people want to call us something, that's totally cool with me.
It's a funny thing to have a genre prescribed onto you, to have outside forces define your work for you, especially if you disagree with their take. Of course, this happens all the time. You can thank us music journalists for terms like shoegaze and grunge, the latter of which we explored in detail in our episode on Mudhoney. Even still, emo stands out as a curiosity. Punk and hardcore pride themselves on progressive politics. So it's a bit contradictory to frown upon the idea of leading with your emotions. Why fight oppressive forces if you won't even allow yourself to self-express? Even when I was a young lad in the early 2000s, participating in emo culture still made you feel like an outsider. Perusing band tees at Hot Topic, writing angsty bulletin posts on MySpace during emo's third wave. Being called an emo was usually seen as an insult. But the music from Rites of Spring, all the way through Jimmy Eat World, has since become vastly influential. The sound became more defined. High-end guitar tones, compression-heavy production techniques, and vocal styles that might be hard to specify, but you kind of know it when you hear it. Something happened where artists who grew up with the music shed the stigma of emo and just appreciated it for what it was. Emo music helped people feel seen, and the definition of emo only expanded. We began to hear music labeled as emo that was softer, like American football. Or another Seattle favorite, Death Cab for Cutie.
Love of mine, someday you will die, but I'll be close behind. I'll follow you into the dark.
Now emo is a term to be embraced, something to even strive for. It may still be a mystery to its pioneers, but emo has become something bigger than any of them could have ever imagined. Rites of Spring would inevitably break up a year after the release of their only album. But its members never stopped. Picciotto and Canty would soon team up with Mackay, to form arguably one of the best and most important punk bands of all time, Fugazi. But that's a story for another time. Rites of Spring were a quick passing moment in one of the most vibrant music scenes in the US. Their influence endures. They obviously touched Kurt Cobain, who processed his own intense emotions through screaming and screeching guitars. And hey, they even paved the way for emotional kids like me with questionable fashion taste, who just wanted to feel seen. So from one reformed emo to another, my bleeding heart thanks you, Rites of Spring. Even if you were just misunderstood.
But in my veins, trace remains. In my veins, yeah, trace remains.
That was Dusty covering Rites of Spring's self-titled album from 1985. We talked about you being kind of an early emo scholar. When was the first time you heard this album?
Well, my emo journey, as I kind of get to in the piece, is a little backwards. I mean, relative. Third wave emo was my entry point. All the mall punk stuff, and then you hear like, oh, it's actually Sunny Day Real Estate if you're like a real fan of emo. And then you come find out like, oh, well, that's not the real emo. It's actually Rites of Spring. And so I kind of like went backwards and backwards from that. And yeah, I don't know. It must have been high school or whatever, or shortly after high school. And to be honest, even finding Sunny Day Real Estate too and Rites of Spring, I did not get how this was emo. From my point of reference that I had at that point.
Yeah, that's the thing that I wanted to say is that maybe I heard this album for the first time 10, 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was like, this is emo? This is what people called emo?
Right. Yeah, it's such a funny thing. It's like, I think so the waves of emo thing is kind of silly, right? It's like, it's not really well defined, but it is kind of a helpful way of thinking about it. And it's almost like a game of telephone between these different eras of emo bands to me, where like Rites of Spring, if you want to call it emo, how that was translated by like Sunny Day or Weezer's Pinkerton, and then how that was reinterpreted next by like Take You Back Sunday and Fall Out Boy, you know? And like it just kind of iterates in each wave, and then it became a DIY thing, and then suddenly it's like Juice WRLD. And once you can watch it evolve, it's almost like that image of like the chimpanzees turning into people. Like you can kind of see it a little bit better, but when I listen to Rites of Spring on its own, I'm like, this is a really great hardcore album.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought when I listened to it. The associations with emo don't really add up to me, again, as someone who, thinks of it in the stereotypical way. Like, it's just a hardcore album that's emotionally intelligent.
Yeah. That's the thing. Like, even when like emo started to become popular or mainstream popular in like the 2000s, like the best way I could have defined it then was like by the way they sang and maybe the way the guitar parts sounded, the pop punk sort of thing. Like pop punk that was like sadder than Blink-182. And of course, they veered into emo as well later.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Like the word emo is so vague. It's like emotionally charged rock music. Like what rock music is not emotionally charged?
This is very true. And I think like because the term emo was originally intended as a pejorative term,
right,
like that's kind of how I see it. And so like anything that is, emotionally charged, like it doesn't register in my mind because most music we listen to and connect to as human beings is emotionally charged in some way.
Exactly. I mean, I think this is a great album. Like I want to say that. Like I think this band is awesome.
Yeah, this album rules.
Yeah, it's such a great record. And like you can see like there is this shift from, especially in DC, where it's about the government, the system.
Right.
You're welcome for some censoring, Roddy. But it's so much about like against things and like pushing new like ways forward. Whereas the lyrics on this record, like much more inward. It's kind of putting that rage towards himself, like Ipachodo doing that. And some of the lyrics you can identify some emo-isms of like he's talking about like a hole in my heart and stuff like that. Feels very like Tumblr emo post.
Oh yeah. Very overwrought.
yeah, exactly. Like you could see it over a black and white image and like typewriter font or something. But and yeah, to what you're saying, like these bands did not like being called emo, like especially in first and second wave emo, where it was really meant to be dismissive. And the more like you like think about that, the more kind of like messed up it is.
Yeah.
It was like trying to emasculate these artists. Like there was often males in this early era. There's lots of great women and identifying emo artists, but in this era is like, oh, you're talking about your feelings. Like, oh, you're so emotional. Like,
Yeah.
what does that mean? Like, are we not supposed to be? I thought we were punk. I thought we were pushing against these systems that are like patriarchal, like capitalist systems. And
Yeah, these cultural norms that prior generations have drilled into our heads. And yeah, like I think you make a good point about the whole idea of this kind of music being emasculated. And I think about that a lot, especially because indie pop is my emo. And it is like, I mean, the genre consists of a lot of women writing songs about their feelings and how that movement was summarily dismissed by, like macho rock dudes, basically.
Yeah. Shout out to your throwaway style column last month on the softies. You get really deep into that. That really resonated with me of this like idea that you're just so dismissing a whole group of people or like a whole point of view because it doesn't line up with your vision of punk.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, like I think the softies are a perfect example of like emotional music that punks like, and I do get into that in great detail, like exhaustive detail in my column. So yeah, subscribe to the Throwaway Style newsletter if that seems like that could be your kind of thing.
Yeah. And the thing with emo, and I went down this rabbit hole as it was getting popular and trying to understand what it was as as an angsty teen, like you're like, this is meant for me. So let me understand it a little bit better. It's like what keeps something from not being emo or being emo. Like we talked about Black Flag's Damaged. That song Depression.
Yeah.
How is that not an emo song? Like that is like the textbook. And I can remember going on like Last FM, I just still use a lot, and you could tag music by genres, like users do that. And I'd look at the emo tag and it'd be like Johnny Cash, Hurt. That's an emo song. I'm like, no, it's not. But I'm like, but I guess it does. It's emotional, like, it's a cover, but like it's a sad song. I guess that's emo. But
yeah, I think it's interesting when we tag music under genres, hearing something that fits the spirit of the genre, but not the sound. So it can't be put in this little box.
I mean, this is a hot take I feel like I've shared with you before, but I feel like Nirvana is more of an emo band than a grunge band by like whatever these vague definitions have been thrust upon us.
Oh, absolutely. Kurt was emo.
Yeah. I feel like especially in that like starting with Nevermind, like, dude, how is this not an emo record?
I mean, yeah, we've talked a lot about how Kurt's origin story as an artist was his parents' divorce. Like that is rife subject matter for the entire emo genre.
That's like the original sin of emo. No, it's true. I mean, loved to write in his notebooks, wore cardigans, like sang about his emotional distress. Like that is textbook emo. And then catchy songs with great riffs, heavy.
Yeah. You could say that's like the spirit of emo. I mean, think about how much Kurt screamed on records. Like, in an alternate universe where emo did not become what it became, Nirvana is an emo band.
Yeah. Feel free to send us your hate mail if you disagree with that take.
We're gonna get so much. We're probably gonna get the most hate mail we've ever gotten for that one comment.
We appreciate your opinions as much as you appreciate ours.
Also, one more thing about emo. You can buy Nirvana shirts at Hot Topic. Just saying.
I can verify that as someone who as a teenager bought a Nirvana shirt at a Hot Topic. It was like that and a MySpace Ruined My Life shirt in like the pink font,
Man, talk
classic.
about an origin story.
Man, how did I not know I was emo this whole time?
All right, before we go, we should definitely also talk about Discord Records, which put out this album and, is one of the seminal punk labels in American history.
Oh yeah, I mean it's like that and like SST as like key pillars of American punk. Like,
yeah,
and not alone just Ian MacKaye as a person, like almost the poster child. Like
I would call him a cottage industry, but he would absolutely hate that. So I'm not going to use that term. But I think it's interesting that Discord as a label and its countercultural ethos came in the shadow of the American government in Washington, D.C. I mean, there's a lot of opinions that I could spout about that whole thing, but we're not going to get into that.
No, I mean, like without getting too into it either, like it is like truly like poetic, also entirely reasonable that this foundational punk institution would come from like the doorsteps of the Capitol. It's crazy. Very
much akin to the saying, the personal is political. Yeah. So yeah, what's your favorite Discord album? If you had to pick one, is it this album?
This is a big contender. Like I feel like that's a cop out, but I really would have said that before this conversation, like because I spent so much time with it trying to understand it and figure out the whole emo-ness of it, and then found out I loved it. I mean, I'm going pretty basic. Like a lot of the Fugazi records, like 13 songs. Like, it's a classic for a reason. Minor Threat's first record. I don't know. What about you? What are your?
See, I'm a big Minor Threat fan. Yeah. I mean, like even before I got into hardcore music. I mean, I've talked about this on the podcast before, but like, I was very well into my 30s before I even started liking hardcore. Yeah. But Minor Threat has always been one of my favorite punk bands. And, I cannot identify as straight edge. I mean, but I do identify with a lot of the things that Ian MacKaye shouted and just the music in general. Like it's just music to get your blood pumping to.
Yeah.
Like if you ever, need something that, stands up for something and also rips, like you can't go wrong with Minor Threat.
Yeah. I mean, that briefly too, that whole straight edge element, like I can't tell you like how useful that was. Like for me, when I was like a young kid, like I didn't party or anything, but like, you ran these scenes and to be able to just be like, oh, I'm straight edge was like, and people just respected that. Like that was a huge cultural shift. Like I would not say I'm straight edge anymore. But that whole idea of like, you can be punk, you be all these things without having to be all these other things. Like it's that personal journey. I don't know. I just really respect that. Like even not identifying as that, I love that is a thing.
No, absolutely. I mean, I know people and know of people who don't listen to punk music and identify as straight edge. So that speaks to how far reaching that culture is.
Yeah, absolutely.
This episode was produced by Dusty Henry. The audio was mixed by Roddy Nikpour. Our podcast manager is Isabel Khalili. And Larry Mizell Jr. is our director of editorial.
And as always, if you want to support the work we're doing on this podcast and KEXP Editorial overall, all of our podcasts, Martin's newsletter, lots of great work happening on our team, you can make a financial contribution to what we're doing by going to kexp.org/Cobain. You can become an amplifier or make a one-time donation. $20 is always great. Even if you don't, we appreciate your support and helping us do all this great work here at KEXP. And on that, I'm Dusty Henry.
And I'm Martin Douglas. We'll see you next week on the Cobain 50 from listener-powered KEXP, where the music matters.
I remember reading They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us and the whole section about Fall Out Boy. I was like, oh, this is speaking directly to my heart.
See, I liked it from an intellectual perspective.
Yeah.
I skipped over the parts about emo.
You didn't understand, Martin.